you look very differently at advice now. You look and say, what would a consumer reasonably be expected to understand? And you actually put the onus on the advisor to highlight unusual clauses. And I want to use, there were actually two cases that came out of rulings that came out of your office, which related to tracking devices, which I found very, very interesting. So just for our listeners, there was a Toyota Hilux was stolen whilst on holiday. The insurer, it was obviously stolen. The insurer added an additional 45,000 Rand theft excess because the vehicle was supposed to be fitted with a tracker. There was also Land Cruiser had a very similar case. Why do you think it was up to the advisor, not the consumer, to know this?
Well, look, from our perspective, there's two elements to these cases. The first element is when you buy a vehicle and the insurer immediately requires a tracking device to be installed, otherwise you're not covered for theft or hijacking, for example. So there the onus is immediately on the reasonable advisor to advise the client, listen, you have a certain time period after buying this car to have a tracker installed, or if you don't do it, you won't be covered. And it must be very clear and explicit. It mustn't be some sort of guessing game as to whether it was conveyed or not. The code requires the advisor to give this advice because it's very material, very important. Give this advice to the consumer and also follow up to see did they actually do it. You can't just advise and then just leave it under the particular, depending on the circumstances. So that's the one scenario. Buying a brand new car requires a tracker. The other scenario, which is more predominantly one we've been dealing with for the last few years, is a new requirement that came in. So you'll get lots of people who bought vehicles years ago now and no tracker was required, or a single tracker was required, for example. Now suddenly the insurers realize there's a lot of high-risk vehicles that are being stolen commonly on our roads or in malls or wherever it may be. And then they insisted on new conditions. For example, now it's a high-risk vehicle, the tracker must be installed, or a second type of satellite tracking device must be installed. Now, this is a new requirement that came in that the insurers imposed. The advisor's duty there is very clear. Tell your client, this is a new requirement, it's material. If you don't have it installed, you won't have cover. And we found a number of cases where the advisor simply sent a generic letter to all his clients to say, listen, new measures have come into place. Just check whether yours isn't a high-risk vehicle and you might have to install the tracker. Something generic, very non-descriptive, non-specific, just a general template that went out. We said, no, that is not acceptable. A reasonable advisor would most certainly identify the specific client who's affected, inform them specifically of the requirement, and where necessary, actually follow up to check, did they install it? That would be the standard reasonable advisor in terms of the code and in law, in our view, and that's the conditions we imposed, and we held advisors liable